I don't want to do it.
Well, it's one or the other, Adol. You either become a better sailor or you become a better swimmer. The choice is yours.
But I was fine in E7.
What do you mean you were fine in E7? Oh, right, I see what you're doing here. You just want me to play another East game, don't you? Well, you know what? I'm going to indulge you this time because I actually liked E6. You thought we were done with East? Nah. I can't get enough of Adol's adventures, and that feeling is no different for E7. Like E6, this was another title that I wanted to play before diving into Monstrum Nox, but unlike its sequential predecessor, because Falcom made more games before spawning E7, the series as a whole was in a far better state than it was during the period surrounding Ark of Napishtim. For example, this game didn't have the burden of effectively reviving a series. First released on the PSP in Japan for 2009, E7 would later get a localization from Xseed for its introduction to the likes of Europe and North America in 2010. Eventually, this would be ported to the PC for worldwide audiences in 2017. And if you know me, you'll be unsurprised to find out that this is the version I played on. I used my 360 controller as always, so be aware of differing button prompts, and I have indeed finished the game as of the time of recording. For those curious, I also used a mod which sharpened up the textures as well. Graphics don't normally bother me, but hey, the option was there and I took it. As I do with all of my reviews, there will also be minor spoilers for the first 10 minutes or so of the game. With Adol once again getting a bite from the adventure bugs, let's see what he and best bud Dogi get up to this time around. Oh yeah, and that's a big plus already. Dogi is playable. The journey begins with our recognisable pair traversing the waves and making their way to the region of Altargo. Now I can already see where this is going, so let's give Adol a few words of positivity before the inevitable happens. And it's a very strong positive. Not long after a few lines of dialogue are you treated to this. Honestly, this opening is just so cool. It's everything that I love about Falcom games rolled into 1 minute of pulsating badassery. The brilliant artwork, the pleasing transitions, and of course the amazing music. This intro in of itself got me so pumped up for the adventure, and I would say it's my second favourite next to East Origin, but a really close second. If E7 was looking to make a good first impression, then it delivered on that in spades. Anyway, Adol and Dogi arrive on dry land. Oh? And he bumps into a hot babe.
Oh!
And then he gets thrown in jail.
Oh.
Yeah, this time around it's not the briny deep, but the iron slammer. He can't catch a break. Props to Dogi for sticking with him though. Anyway, it's not all bad as they're both freed by order of the King of Altargo and asked to investigate a nearby shrine. Soon after, you're thrust into the wide new world and your adventure begins. Now, like Ark of Napishtim, E7 was effectively revamping the series once again. It was the first game to utilise the group-based combat that many fans will be familiar with, a system that would later be refined in Memories of Celceta, Ys8 and Ys9. You have active control of one character, allowing you to roll, attack, use skills and guard. On top of that though, the player is able to freely change active control to any of the other two members in their party who will specialise in a certain weapon proficiency, slash, pierce or strike. And E7 places a high level of importance on this mechanic, as certain enemies will only take notable damage from specific weapon types. Now, though it punishes the player strongly for not using the correct weapon, I feel it works in the game's favour. One of my biggest complaints from Memories of Celceta, the game immediately following this one, was that there was a notable imbalance between ranged and melee characters. There's none of that in E7. You do have your ranged members, but they're handicapped by shorter firing distance, lower overall damage, or weapon skills with more drawn out downtimes. Talking about weapon skills, this is another really cool part about E7. As you progress through the game, you'll get access to a myriad of equipment to aid you, and many of the weapons will have a specific skill attached to them. In order to utilise this skill indefinitely, you need to use said skill with the weapon it stems from, which effectively means that all weapons in the game have a purpose beyond just making you stronger. And as you gain more and more skills, you can customize your layouts to find a style that suits you. It's a really neat system that rewards the players who dedicate a little extra time to the combat. But despite that, I have to give the game props for not feeling grindy, and I think that simply comes down to the fact that the combat is fun. I mean, that's not a surprise. East combat is pretty much always the highlight of these games, and even though this may be the first of its own archetype of combat, it still holds its own even against the later entries. It's fast, fluid, smooth, and also decently challenging. It was so challenging in fact that it will most likely be the last game I play on the highest difficulty. For whatever reason, E7 chewed me out. I had no problems with the likes of Ys 8 or Memories of Celceta, but the final boss alone in this adventure took me well over an hour to beat. And it's not because it's a cheap encounter, it's simply because I was not good enough. But damn was it satisfying when it hit the dirt. Now it's not all praise for the combat, there are a few minor gripes that I had with it. Primarily, the AI is not great. It was pretty naff in Memories of Celceta, but it's worse here. Your companions will rarely use their own skills, they'll sometimes run off and prioritise other enemies that are out of their reach, and other times they won't attack at all. It's not game breaking, but it just makes me wish there was a little bit more polish. Also, though I'm personally a fan of games like Ys allowing the player to figure things out for themselves, it also commits the same crime that Ark of Napishtim did. It doesn't explain to you how to use an important move. In E6 it was the doltish dash jump, and in E7 it's the flash guard. Now admittedly, the flash guard is nowhere near as difficult to understand as the dash jump, and anyone who has played a later Ys game will have an idea that this option exists. But despite that, I can't let this lack of guidance slide because of how important the mechanic is to your experience, especially on the higher difficulties. The flash guard is imperative for some of the later boss battles, as not only does it give you a much needed boost in damage, it's also one of the only efficient ways of raising your special meter, which you will desperately need at times. It sucks because most of the other aspects are explained well enough, it's just this one that stood out to me because of how integral it was to my playthrough. Nevertheless though, once you've got it down, you'll most likely have a blast with the combat. But of course, Ys games are not all about slicing and pounding unfortunate wildlife. A large degree of excitement also comes from exploration, this idea of journeying into the unknown. And Altargo in the majority is a nice region, there's plenty of diversity in the environments and some very impressive vistas, especially for a game that was originally on the PSP. There's also a fair amount of responsibility put on the player to find the added content, as side quests are not marked on a map. You have to find them yourselves, which is an aspect I enjoy about the older Ys titles. However, I will say that the quests themselves aren't great. They're mostly collectathons for certain raw materials found in the overworld, and they don't really extend much beyond that. There was no quest, at least from the 16 or so that I did, that really stood out to me as anything noteworthy. On top of that, though the region is largely open for you to explore, I did get the feeling that Altargo was more boxed in and linear in design. There wasn't much off the beaten path like in Felgana or Ark of Napishtim, but despite those shortcomings, it was still a pleasure to journey through. And that praise also extends to the dungeons. And wow, these dungeons. In my opinion, every single one was top grade design-wise. The aesthetic alone for these places was breathtaking, but then add in the puzzles that don't break up the flow and pace of the experience, the multi-dimensional exploration, the use of key items that you find throughout your adventures that will open up more bounties for you to plunder. These were excellent breaks from the overworld, and I would even say that they're my favourite iteration in the series thus far. They strike that balance of challenge and mystery perfectly. And it's not just the dungeons that do that, because when you think that your trial is over, you're gonna need to put your big boy trousers on and take out the beasts lurking within the depths. That's right, this game has bosses as well, and oh my goodness, they are a rush. First of all, they are all well earning of the name boss. They absolutely stomped me at times, and thus it becomes a learning experience of how you can best engage one of these behemoths, whether it be through grasping their attack patterns or just being more patient. I love games like this that make you abide by its rules. There are no free lunches here, but they also deliver on spectacle. Many of them are multi-phased, the arenas are utilised to their fullest, and in some cases the entire flow of a battle is thrown out of kilter by some inspired moments.
Add on to that a top drawer soundtrack accompanying every fight, and you've got one successful recipe. I've got nothing bad to say about the bosses, they were a blast from the start all the way to the end of E7's story. And what about that story? Is it any good? I'd say it's decent. It's generic in the route it goes for, but it is executed well, which is something Ys games are quite adept at. The pacing is strong owing to the relatively short runtime clocking in at around 20 hours, and there's some really neat twists in there as well. I also appreciate that some of the choices that you'll periodically be given in game will actually affect your playthrough. I'm not going to spoil that for you, but your choices do have weight at times, a nice little addition here. However, I feel that the strongest part of E7's narrative comes from its interconnectivity with the wider series, something that started to gain traction in Ys 6. Canonically, if we're disregarding Ys 9, this is the latest game in the series, and as such, Adol is now a seasoned adventurer. People around the land of Otago know about him. They ask him for help because he has overcome the impossible many times before. And what I love about this is that this goes beyond minor references because it's interwoven into the tale of Ys 7. You can understand why choices are made or directions that the story takes because of Adol's past deeds. And as a result, it is a very rewarding experience for the long-term fans of this stalwart. So the story's good, but what about the characters? It's a mixed bag for me. The supporting cast that accompany Adol and Dogi are fine, they get some decent development here and there, though I feel at times it is a little lacking. Not to mention I think the chemistry between the group is not as good as I've seen in other games of this ilk. They're serviceable at the very least though. However, though E7's supporting cast may not be the greatest in the series, it does shine in an area where Ys games tend to be weaker, and that is in the antagonist. I don't want to say too much here, but the antagonist in E7 is very good. It's not just a fleeting appearance with some drops of backstory to make them relatable, or try to make them relatable. It's far more than that, it's more compelling to understand their situation. If I'm being honest, I actually believe that E7's antagonist is the best in the series thus far. They were able to hit all the aspects of what I believe makes a compelling villain. And that is impressive again when you consider the short runtime. I don't want to say more on it for fear of spoiling, but I was pleasantly surprised. That being said, I was not surprised about my overall positive experience with Adol and friends in the land of Otago. E7 is everything you expect from the Ys series. Solid and engaging combat, a decent level of challenge, a compelling narrative, an awesome soundtrack, and an enjoyable world to explore. It has its shortcomings as many games do, and at times I feel that there is the odd lack of polish here and there, but for a game that originally released in 2009 for the PSP, I think it more than holds up even 12 years later. It's a fantastic game through and through, and if you're getting impatient waiting for Ys 9's arrival on your chosen platform, you will not be disappointed in giving this a go beforehand.